Guzzo at the Journal of Commerce, and I am with Kurt Nagle, who is President and CEO of the American Association of Port Authorities. They're at their annual convention here in Seattle. Kurt, first of all, congratulations. This is your 100th convention?
Yeah, thank you. It's quite a special occasion for us. We're using this to kick off a year-long centennial celebration where we're going to not only highlight certainly the industry association's achievements over the past 100 years, but to use it to talk about really the importance of ports and what those years in history of ports has done in terms of the quality of life for folks around the Western Hemisphere.
Well, very good. Congratulations. Now, Kurt, I've heard a lot so far at this conference about the needs of the ports to expand their facilities, to dredge deeper harbors. This costs a lot of money. How are ports raising the capital for these projects in these tough economic times?
They're doing it in a number of ways. In a number of cases, ports have actually used this period where, with the tough economic times, obviously the trade was impacted, so we had some reduced trade, or at least in areas less trade growth in the short term. So ports were using that, essentially a little bit of a respite, to actually make some improvements, develop their facilities, and what they also found was, because of the economic downturn, in many cases they were able to make those improvements at perhaps lower cost and quicker than they might have been able to do otherwise. Also, they're obviously trying to continue to squeeze out whatever level of revenues they can out of their existing port operations to help fund those. But in addition to those types of internal funding mechanisms, ports are also looking increasingly toward their private terminal operator partners, private equity firms that are still interested in looking at investing in infrastructure type facilities like ports that can provide a long-term stable return on investment. We're also looking for some help from the federal government, both in terms of Tiger grants during these tough economic times, and also in terms of the dredging of the harbors, et cetera, that you mentioned. That is a cost-shared relationship between the local port and the federal government, so we continue to advocate in Washington for the federal government to recognize where federal channels need to be deepened and widened and make those federal investments with the cost share from the local port.
Thanks, Kurt. Ports, as they expand, they do have an impact on neighboring communities. Now, 10 years ago, most ports didn't even have a staff member assigned to environmental issues. Today, ports have entire departments. What are some of the most important environmental challenges facing the ports today?
Sure, and as you referenced the increasing focus on those environmental areas, similarly, the association recently, we used to have a Harbors Navigation and Environment Committee, and this past year our chairman, Pete Rashak, separated those into two standing separate committees. So now we have a committee that is focused entirely on the environment. And as public port agencies, part of the port's role and mission is to be stewards of the coastal environment. So ports are doing more and more to enhance their environment. In essentially every port project that is undertaken and planned has a significant environmental enhancement as part of it. Some of the things specifically that I think are pressing right now are issues in terms of diesel emissions, air quality issues in and around ports, water quality issues in and around ports, and just the overall, I think, sustainability of port operations. And when we talk sustainability, which we have as a standard business practice for the industry, we're talking environmental sustainability, but also social sustainability, being good neighbors within the community, and obviously economic and financial stability as well.
Okay, for the past 100 years, the AAPA has been the voice of ports, both in Washington, D.C. and other capitals, and internationally. What are some of the important issues that AAPA is advocating for now in Washington and before groups such as the International Maritime Organization?
In terms of the international organizations, one of the things that we advocated for most recently was the establishment of an emissions control area for North America that does impact significantly in terms of the emissions of the vessels that will be entering and leaving our ports. That's an area that ports don't have direct control over, but by advocating an international agreement such as an ECA, that will help reduce emissions of the vessels as they enter and leave our waters. In terms of the U.S. advocacy, certainly right now one of the key issues is to ensure that policymakers, both up on Capitol Hill and within the administration, recognize and prioritize the role that ports play in terms of our economy, job creation, and our ability to export competitively to meet the President's goal of doubling exports in the next 5 years. So we're certainly advocating very strongly that port issues need to be a high priority within the federal government to ensure that as they're looking at ways of reducing the federal deficit and to cut the levels of the federal budget, that they recognize that to focus those limited resources on where it can be most effectively spent, effective utilization of those resources, and where it pays dividends for the country. And obviously investments in ports and that surrounding infrastructure do that. So that's kind of where we're focusing our efforts right now. In addition to the areas that we had talked about related to the environment, the diesel emissions reduction funding at the federal level to help ports and their terminal operators make investments in either retrofitting their equipment, retrofitting trucks, et cetera, to reduce emissions, as well as continuing to advocate for federal help in the port security grant area to continue to help ports make security enhancements at their facilities.